Assalamu alaikum brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Divine Reality course. Now we're going to be moving on to a new argument which is called a universe from nothing. Now before we get into this, just as a summary, last week we covered the argument from dependency or contingency. Hopefully you guys went through it and everything was clear. A very good resource for you guys inshallah if you want more information on the argument from dependency is the book that we have published at Sapience, which is called The Burhan by brother Muhammad Hijab. Definitely download that book and read that book inshallah. It's a phenomenal book inshallah. So that being said, let's move on to the argument which is referred to as a universe from nothing, the Quranic argument for God's existence and oneness. Now, here's what we will cover. We'll start with a thought experiment, as we do with most of these sessions, because we want to really warm up our minds and have a, if you like, mental concept or construct which we can always fall back on and fill in with the rest of the content that we cover inshallah. Then we'll look at the Quranic argument. Did the universe begin to exist? We'll entertain this question which stems from this particular argument. And then we'll look at some of the possibilities as far as the universe is concerned. So we'll look at, did the universe come from nothing? Did the universe create itself? Or was the universe created by something else which was also created? So could it be the case that our universe was created by another universe which was created by another universe? And we can go on asking that question. So is that a possibility? And then we'll look at, well, or is it the fact that the universe was created by an uncreated creator? And we'll sort of highlight why this is the most rational, intuitive conclusion one can come to. So then after this, we'll follow this up by looking at the responses to some of the objections. Then we'll look at some of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names and attributes. And we'll end on a spiritual note, as we do with most of our sessions or all of our sessions. We will look at how all of the things that we've covered in this argument link to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone is the one that is worthy of all worship and all praise. And as we always say, and as I want to reiterate here again, that the objective, brothers and sisters, of this course, is not for us to leave thinking that the da'wah is all about argumentation or philosophy or philosophical arguments, theo-philosophical arguments. No, what we need to understand is that these arguments are a means within a specific context, meaning that you may come across people, especially in the times that we live in today, that are inclined towards this type of discourse. They are inclined towards argumentation, philosophy, logic, reason, and therefore whenever they are to believe in something, they require some sort of philosophical, logical, rational, maybe even empirical proof. So if we're engaging with these types of people, we need to then realize that for them, what may trigger their fitrah is a philosophical argument potentially. So that's what we need to do. Then when we speak to these people, we have to share arguments with these people. And that being said, when we speak to people that are not interested in this type of stuff, not inclined towards philosophy or logic or reason, they may be more poetic in nature, or maybe just people that think deeply. For them, it may be a good case to use another strategy. Maybe just go straight to the Quran. So it's very important to understand the context of this course. That being said, this particular argument, brothers and sisters, is one of my favorite arguments. It's a very powerful argument. It's an argument which has its basis in the Quran itself, as we'll come to see. Now let's start off with this little thought experiment. Imagine that you are sitting in your room right now, you're listening to this lecture, and you suddenly start to feel really sleepy. Your eyes start to feel really heavy, your eyes start to close. And eventually, before you know it, you're fast asleep. Now, as you're sleeping, you suddenly hear a noise and you wake up. And when you wake up, you're no longer in your room. You're no longer in your bedroom or your living room. You now find yourself in a space which is white. And there's 4 white walls, a white ceiling, and a white floor. It's all white. You're in a white box type room. You can't seem to see any entrances, you can't seem to see any exits. It's just an empty white room and you're inside it. Now, instead of freaking out in this thought experiment, what you instead end up doing, because you get really bored and there's nothing to do, you end up falling asleep again. Now you fall asleep, But when you wake up this time, right in front of you, you find a desk and there is a laptop on that desk. And on that laptop it says, on the screen it says, this laptop and this desk came from nothing! Exclamation mark. Now, what do you make of this? This proposition, which is stated on the screen in front of you. This laptop and this desk came from nothing. Now, immediately you'll start to think about some things. Well, I'm in a room where there aren't any doors or windows. That's one thing. However, this particular laptop still cannot come from nothing or even create itself, because it requires an explanation outside of itself. It requires something outside of itself to explain how this desk came into the room, who put it together, and who put the laptop on top of the computer. So it requires an explanation. Something outside of itself placed the desk in that room and placed the laptop in that room. And that is the most rational conclusion, even though you still haven't worked out the exact details of how someone would have gotten in and brought the table in and put the computer on top of the table, etc. But that is the most rational and logical explanation. You wouldn't assume that the most rational and intuitive and logical explanation is that the laptop and the desk came from nothing, right? That is that's an absurd proposition. Now, this is exactly the argument in a nutshell. This particular argument, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at how, just like the laptop and the desk that emerges within this room, the universe doesn't just come out of nothing, doesn't just create itself. The most intuitive, and even on a very surface level as we're talking about this right now, even before going through this argument, when we think about our universe, when we look at our universe, when we reflect upon our universe, the most obvious, intuitive, rational conclusion that we can make is the entire universe was caused or created or brought into existence by something outside of itself. It's a very intuitive conclusion. We don't naturally assume that, our entire universe and everything that exists within the universe came out of nothing. We don't conclude this. Now, brothers and sisters, this particular argument, the Quranic argument for God's existence, stems from chapter 52, verses 35 and 36, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or were they created by nothing? Am khuliku min ghayri shay'in? Or were they the creators of themselves? And then Allah says in the next ayah, or did they create the heavens and the earth, but rather they are not certain, or that they don't want to be certain. Both meanings are contained within the ending of the second ayah of ayah 36. Now, what I want you to do for a second is I want you to think about these verses. Let's go through them again. Allah says, or were they created by nothing? Or were they the creators of themselves? There's two possibilities Allah is outlining here. And then Allah says in the next ayah, were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? Three possibilities. And then Allah concludes by saying, but rather they are not certain, or they don't want to be certain. Now there are three possibilities, as we can see immediately, just from a superficial reading of the ayah, that there are three possibilities outlined in this particular ayah, that are or questions, rhetorical questions that Allah is asking us. And from these rhetorical questions, we can derive, if you like, more direct questions. So when Allah says, were they created by nothing? We can ask the question, can something come from nothing? When Allah says, were they the creators of themselves? We can ask the question, well, can something create itself? When Allah says, or did they create the heavens and the earth? We can ask the question, well, can something, because if Allah is saying that we create the heavens and the earth, we are created, the heavens and the earth are created, so something creating something else created. So we can ask, well, could the universe be created by something else created? And then Allah leaves us with the conclusion, which is that, but rather they are not certain. There is a fourth possibility, which we'll entertain as we'll go through this entire argument. So, when we read these ayat, brothers and sisters, there are two perspectives or two ways we can reflect upon these ayat. And this is going to be a concluding point for this particular session. And again, I want you to think about these things before you move on to the next video. The first way of looking at these ayat, as we should initially always look at ayat of the Quran, is what is the intended purpose? What is the intended meaning? What do we get on a surface level, on a direct level when we read the ayat? What immediately comes to us? And that is that Allah is engaging with us. Allah is speaking to us. Allah is asking us questions, whether we call them rhetorical questions, but by the fact that, or through the fact that Allah is asking us questions, it's human psychology, human nature, that as soon as we're asked a question, we immediately start thinking about the answer. We're engaged. Questions engage us. We can't just, it's not the case that we're asked a question and we're just blank. So when Allah is saying, were they created by nothing? If I asked you, were you created by nothing? Immediately you're thinking. You will think about your existence. You'll think about your origins. And this is powerful because this immediately gets us to engage with these ayat. Right? And initially it's us. We're the ones that are being asked this question. So we're thinking about ourselves. Can I come from nothing? Can I create myself? Could I create the heavens and the earth? And I want you to think about these questions on this level. And the second level is, if you like, on a more secondary, reflective level, where we can now apply the questions that emerge from these ayat, the possibilities that emerge from these ayat, to anything that begins to exist as the scholars have outlined. Right? So, because Allah, Allah is talking about things, He's referring to us, and we are creation. We are creation. So essentially, these possibilities can be applied to anything besides Allah, anything that comes into existence, anything that is created. And that is everything besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, these questions can be applied to our universe too. So we can ask the question, can the universe come from nothing? We can ask the question, could the universe create itself? We can ask the question, could the universe be created by another universe which was created, or something else that was created? And we can engage these questions and inquire. So I want you to stop here, brothers and sisters. I want you to reflect upon these ayat now. I want you to reflect upon them, think about them deeply. Think about them on the immediate level when it comes to yourselves, and think about them on the secondary level, which is now we are deriving these possibilities from these ayat. Can something come from nothing? Can something create itself? Can something created create something else which is created? And then apply these and reflect upon these from the perspective of the universe. What does it mean when we ask these questions in regards to the universe? And when you're ready, move on to the next section.